That YouTube as well? Perfect. Okay, well, thank you everyone for your patience as we waded through some of those technical difficulties. It's funny how quickly you forget some things, right? Pandemic's over and Zoom is once again new to us. So I'll begin by calling the meeting to order. So virtual meeting, the first step would be roll call. First up, Catherine Morse.
Here, and I'm one of the picnickers, I guess.
Yeah, we're all picnicking today. Thank you, Counselor. Counselor Purdy.
I'm here, and I wish I were picnicking today, not having snow on the ground.
Counselor Clare.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And it's funny, I did an interview out in front of City Hall where it was sunny. I had to wear sunglasses. So I've had snow, I've had rain, and I've had sun. This is a typical Nova Scotia spring.
Indeed, Counselor. Counselor Cuddle.
Present.
Awesome. And Counselor Young has sent regrets. And for anyone watching confused by picnic, as Counselor Cleary explained, problem in chair, not in computer. I'll try not to take that personally as the chair of the meeting, but so with that, everyone's accounted for who we're expecting. So I'll go to the land acknowledgement. The Halifax Regional Municipality is located in Mi'kma'ki, the ancestral and traditional lands of the Mi'kmaq people. The municipality acknowledges the peace and friendship treaty signed in this territory and recognizes that we are all treaty people. Okay, approval. Move that. Counselor Clary, second by. All in favor?
Aye.
All those opposed? All right, so that carries. Sorry, I'm just scanning here. It's hard to do this on the computer screen when it's a small laptop anyway. Approval of the orders of additions and deletions. Mr. Clerk.
Thank you, Chair. The clerk's office has not received any requests for additions or deletions as of this time.
Okay. Councillor Cuddle.
Hi, I did email the clerks and yourself there, Mr. Chair, about an addition to the agenda regarding the Robie Street corridor. I does not look like that made it on the agenda. I don't know if there's an opportunity to add it now.
Yep. I'm sorry, Councillor Cuddle. I believe I had received the first email from yourself there. We were unsure if you were planning to make that as a request for an addition or if that was a potential notice of motion, I believe. If we would like to consider it as an added item, I think we would have to, we'd want to ensure we understood what the potential motion would be, and then we'd be able to request an addition for that as a 2/3 majority vote.
Okay, I'm putting that, it was intended, if possible, to have it as a motion on the agenda for today, and I've just posted it in the chat.
I do recall seeing the question back, Councillor Cuddle, but I know the intention was to have this in this meeting and it's a light agenda. So I would recommend to committee here that we add this, but I'll leave that to folks. So Simon, we would have to vote 2/3 to amend the order of business to add this?
Yes, that's correct, Chair.
Okay. I don't like that. Would we vote on that or go to rest of the orders of business, additions and deletions if there's any others?
Believe we would just at this point ask if there are any additional requests for additions or deletions, and we can vote on that as a whole package just to include as amended.
Okay. Does anyone else have any other changes that they would like to make to the agenda? Seeing none, we'll vote on the order of business, and to add the motion as Councillor Cuttle has requested, we'll need 2/3. So all those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? All right, that is carried. It is very inefficient, actually. So business arising out of the minutes, we have none. Mentions of conflict of interest. Does anyone have a conflict to declare today? Seeing none. There are no motions of reconsideration, no motions of rescission. There is no deferred business. There are no tabled matters. Mr. Clerk, correspondence, petitions, delegations.
Thank you, Chair. There has been no correspondence received to be circulated with this agenda package relating to items on this agenda.
Okay. Does anyone on committee have a petition for today? Seeing none. So we'll move on to 10.3, which is Ashley Burrs with the Ecology Action Center on ferry options. And please correct me if I've said your first name there incorrect.
I believe it said Ashley, but the person that's going to be presenting is Devin Smith, and I, Simone, I'm just here as EAC support.
Okay. Sounds good. The floor will be yours, subject to whatever technical things the clerks might have for us here.
Perfect. Yeah, I just have a PowerPoint to go with my presentation. But in the meantime, I can introduce myself. My name is Devin. I'm a DAL student, and I'm doing my practicum placement at the Ecology Action Center. So this semester, I was tasked with looking into potentially expanding ferry services in Halifax. So next slide. Next slide. Oh, thank you. So as we know, the Maritimes is Canada's ocean playground. The harbor is part of our city, and before cars came to Halifax, this was our mode of transportation, is boats. The Mi'kmaq people used this before cars came to Halifax. We use it for the movement of goods, but we are underutilizing our space for the movement of people. The HRM is experiencing rapid growth, and we need to equal that with rapid transportation infrastructure. And we are facing congestion issues with cars and buses. And ferries are a mode of public transportation that is currently underutilized in Halifax, and we should expand it. So I'm ready for the next slide. Today we have two asks. So first, we request a staff report supporting reinstating the Northwest Arm Ferry. It's been done successfully before. That's why we are asking for a support reinstating it. And then secondly, a staff report on the cost of a public-private ferry partnership to assess the feasibility of adding more ferries in Halifax, including but not limited to Wrights Cove to downtown, Wrights Cove to Africville, Herring Cove to downtown, and Bedford to downtown, while the electric ferries are being set up. And both reports should be included in both reports should be bus rerouting to a service ferry docks. So yeah, next slide. So these four pictures are public transit systems that have very robust ferries included in them. So top left is London, the Thames. The bottom left is Stockholm, Sweden, and that isn't their full transit map, that is just their ferries. And then top right is Hong Kong Star Ferry, and then bottom right is the Sydney Ferry Network in Australia. So very many robust public transit systems have utilized ferries and their waterways to move people. And as we can see here, there's an opportunity to scale this quite high. There's a lot of infrastructure that already exists in Halifax. We have a lot of public wharves. We have boats that are privately owned, and we have captains to service those boats. So an infrastructure, it would be low cost to get this up and running. If you could go to the next slide. So just to come back to our first ask, which is the staff report exploring reinstating the Northwest Arm Ferry. Next slide. This is a map of Halifax in 1945. And then I'll just go to the next slide, which is a zoomed in piece of this map to show you the arm. I'm hoping the resolution is high enough on everyone's computers, but there are 6 ferries in the arm, and this was from 1945. There are 2 leaving Point Pleasant Park, and then 4 leaving out of the Dingle to go to various places on the peninsula. The Northwest Arm Ferry began operations as early as 1853, which would have been from Purcell's Cove to Point Pleasant Park. Private operators were running the ferry also from Jollymore to Oakland Road Park. And in the 70s, after the rotary was constructed, service dwindled and eventually stopped. So we know that people have used the ferry in the past. We know that it works and the infrastructure still exists. Next slide. And then if we go into more recent history, there's been 3 trials to get the Northwest Arm Ferry reinstated. So in 2001, Michelle Raymond pitched this to council and was rejected. And so she decided to run a 2-week pilot to see if people would use it and how desirable it was. So they were servicing more than 25 passengers per service hour. They hired a local boat operator and they experienced overwhelming success. And then in 2002, they had a pilot with the EAC, but this one was less successful because their ferry captain was unable to communicate when the weather was bad enough to stop the ferry. And so it became quite unreliable. But now this problem wouldn't exist because of the development we've been able to have in technology. The dissemination of information is significantly faster now. So people would be able to know when the ferry wouldn't be running. And then most recently, in 2019, Captain David started the Northwest Arm Ferry privately. He now runs the McNabbs Ferry shuttle because he had to shut down the Northwest Arm Ferry because of COVID. But they all offered services 5 days a week. And then the 2019 revival had services on weekends. And these all ran just in the summer, spring, fall. But Captain David was able to provide us with like a lot of insights for ferry users and how they got to the ferry. He said that he was able to get 60 people per day, so 60 people out and then 60 people back. And over half of them walked or biked to the ferry, and most of the commuters worked at Dal, SMU, or the hospital. Next slide. So here you can see the star is where approximately the dock is at the Dingle. And then number 1 and number 2 is the Jubilee Road boat launch. And number 2 is the Oakland Road Park boat launch. Number 3 is the Henry Hicks. So it would be 11 minutes of walking to get from these locations to the Henry Hicks, 20 minutes to SMU, 18 minutes to IWK, and 30 minutes to Spring Garden. This map doesn't show topography, but there is a significant accessibility limitation because of the hills on both sides. And Oakland Road Dock does have a long set of stairs that you need to go up and down to reach the dock. And the nearest bus terminal is sort of around the Dalplex area, and it has the number 24 bus. And then a little bit further than that, like a 10-minute walk from the ferry stops is the number 4, the 10A, the 10B, 10C, and 24. And there are 50 public, oh, sorry, Patty. You're muted.
Quick correction there, Devin. That's South Street. It's not Jubilee.
Oh, sorry. Apologies. Thank you. And then there's 50 public parking spots at the Dingle. However, bus connections don't service the Dingle at the moment. If you could go to the next slide. So Captain David was able to give me some cost estimates. He was looking into upgrading infrastructure pre-COVID, and he calculated with inflation and estimated what the fixes would be today, and it would be $100,000 upfront. So $50,000 for each wharf that would be chosen to use. And then the cost of insurance, which would be provided by the contracting boat company, would be $15,000 a year. And then the boat company itself would be $25,000 a year, just as an estimation. Next slide. So the benefits is Captain David was charging kind of an arbitrary fare of $4. So we took that with 120 boardings a day would be, and annually we calculated it to run 6 months out of the year. It would be 62,400. That would be the profit that the boat operator would make, or whoever was running it. And overall, that's 60 cars, not trying to find parking, not accessing downtown Halifax, and not trying to make it through the Rotary. And what we can't estimate beyond this is the effect on people who rely on public transit, walking or biking to get around the city that would benefit from this. I know the community of Spryfield really relies on active transportation infrastructure to get around, so this would likely have a large benefit on them. And this would be like quite a low cost operation to have. Next slide. So that brings us to our second ask, which is a staff report on the viability of piloting new ferry services through public-private partnerships, including Wrights Cove to downtown, Wrights Cove to Africville, Herring Cove to downtown, and Bedford to downtown. Next slide. So we envision this happening through a public-private partnership. So being able to contract a local tour boat company, and what we've been able to glean from past trials was ensuring the operation was really difficult, especially when doing like through a public system. And so if we were able to contract a boat out, the contractor would have to provide the insurance, and tour services operate outside of commuting times. So they do have an underutilized service capacity that they could be running commuter ferries, and then also have a tourist aspect on top of that. And also being able to run a pilot program with a public-private partnership would have significantly less cost. We do small pilots all the time, putting concrete barriers up to test out bike lanes. And this would be run at a significantly less cost. Next slide. So a great example of this is the Vancouver Aquabus. This started as just one ferry, but has grown to a fleet of 14 boats that are varying in size. They call them micro ferries because they carry 12 to 30 passengers, and the operating costs are quite low. To fill a tank of gas on that bus is $75 to $100. And the majority of riders are commuters on this. It operates from 7 a.m. to 9 p.m., and it runs rain or shine. They service multiple routes quite frequently. So the most popular stop, there's a ferry coming every 2 minutes. I lived in Vancouver, and I used to take the Aquabus, and people bring their bikes on there. There were orcas that were spotted off the side of the Aquabus. It's a great way it pretty much traverses False Creek. So it's a great way to get around when there's a lot of traffic. So next slide. So the service expansions here, partly we're asking for a staff report because I am not a planner, I'm a political science student. And so trying to figure out what infrastructure is usable and those considerations that need to go in there is something that I don't really know enough about. But my investigation has yielded that there are quite a few public wharves already existing at Herring Cove, 2 in Bedford, and then there's already 1 in the Dingle. And then downtown Halifax, we have the ferry terminal that already exists. And then South End could be looked into using Oakland Road Dock or the Jubilee Road boat launch. Next slide. So beyond just having ferries for commuting, ferries have been shown to promote well-being. There was a study done in Hong Kong, which is actually where I grew up. So I also grew up riding the Star Ferry in Hong Kong. And they have designed their seating to offer to promote socialization on the ferries, and have tried to build a commuting culture that is community driven and encourages social interaction as a form of like creating pro-social indoor environments for people to interact in. A lot of ferry systems in Stockholm and New York offer coffee and tea so that commuters can sit down and drink coffee and tea and encourage communication within passengers. If you think about like even using a smaller ferry too, that's much more intimate setting, designed for and less enclosed, which I think would promote socialization. And also there was another study done on the River Thames in London and the boats that are used there for commuting. And Londoners do have the highest commute times to work. And it was concluded that boat commuters are happier than non-boat users. Studies have shown that boats rocking have lowered cortisol and increased serotonin. Next slide. These are the sources that I've cited in the last slide that if anyone wanted to have a further read into is available in the agenda packet. And then next slide, I am open to questions. Thank you.
Sam, you're muted.
Apparently. Thank you for the presentation. There are some questions here. I thought it would give me a little number on the hands, but I guess it doesn't. Maybe that's Teams. So I'm just going to who I saw first, Cuddle, and then Trish, Councillor Purdy will be next.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Devin, for this presentation. Ferries across the Northwest Arm are a subject that comes up time and again here in my district and in my communities. I was one of the people who used the 2001 pilot when they had the ferry across there when I worked at Dell, and it was great. It probably did put me in a better mood. You know, and we've been having these conversations, and it's been difficult to try to figure out how to pull everything together to kind of advance this conversation about how we might go about implementing this, or where we would even start. So I do appreciate your work here and kind of pulling this all together and doing some of the very preliminary research, especially showing that in other places ferries they do work and they're a normal part of life, and it was a normal part of life here, and somehow we've gotten away from that. But it is our unique advantage of being on the ocean in the harbor. I mean, obviously the Herring Cove ferry to Halifax would be a different kettle of fish because you're in open, unprotected water. You're not in the harbor. For that one, you would be coming into the harbor. But for the Northwest Arm, the idea of having smaller, more nimble boats is a great idea. I'm just wondering, in Australia and Stockholm, are those private operators or are they municipal operators?
They're municipal operators.
Okay, and the examples of the Aquabus in Vancouver, that is a private operator.
Yes.
And in your references at the end there, do you have more information about how that works in terms of the use of docking facilities and licensing agreements and all of that?
I don't. I wasn't able to find much more information than like what was kind of obvious and apparent on the web being covered by the news and everything.
Okay, that's great. I'm definitely going to take this away, and thank you for the presentation, and see where we might be able to take this next in exploring such options. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cuddle. Councillor Purdy.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thanks so much for this, Devin. Great presentation, very interesting. I'd like to see more more work on this for sure. I have a question from David Hensby. Would this private ferry service violate our HRM's collective agreement with our ferry transit operators? I wonder if anyone's able to answer that one. And he also suggested that we could build a bridge across the Northwest Arm too.
I don't know about any violations. What I know from Captain Dave was that he wasn't doing it as a public-private partnership, but he didn't mention running into anything like that. And a bridge would be cool. I've also heard that, but bridges take many years, many years, and a ferry, and it doesn't necessarily solve issues with promoting public transport and congestion issues. And so I think a ferry would be a faster option than a bridge.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you.
Mhm.
Okay, I don't see anyone else.
Hand up.
Sorry, what was that, Councillor Purdy?
Or Simone has her hand up.
Oh, Simone?
Yes, sorry. I think I just wanted to add to Devin's answer, being that that's why really the ask is for the staff reports to explore the feasibility of these ideas. So as Devin mentioned, really right now, HRM staff are best placed to be able to answer a lot of these questions and explore whether or not, for example, something like a public-private partnership would disrupt, say, ferry transit rights. So really, that's why the ask is for those staff reports to really kind of like take this this idea further and see whether it would work for Halifax.
Okay. Okay, well, thank you for that additional info. I don't see any other hands raised from anyone on the committee, so thank you so much for your presentation. I will just add very quickly, as a Dartmouthian, you don't have to sell me on the well-being piece. Like, there's something about taking the ferry that just lets you leave your kind of challenges behind. It's totally sold on that. And from the fanciful side of things, besides Councillor Hensby's bridge, I did have a resident once upon a time reach out to me pitching for a Northwest Arm gondola, since that would solve our elevation problems. But a ferry might be a little bit more in the realm of the immediately doable. So we'll take your presentation into consideration, and perhaps one of the committee members will come back with a motion in at a future meeting. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, councillors, for listening.
Thank you. All right. Mr. Clerk, what do we have to do next? Given we've just done this, we've got to move to public participation, and we have some specific people waiting, do we?
Yes, thank you, Chair. We have 3 registered speakers for public participation, Peggy Cameron, Howard Epstein, and Susan Benet. I am in the process of promoting those members now, and they will have the opportunity to address Transportation Standing Committee.
Okay, and I have on my list here, Peggy is first, and then Howard, and then Susan.
You're muted.
My apologies. Is that working now?
We can now hear you, yes.
Thank you. As between Peggy Cameron and myself, we've wondered if it was okay if I started and we moved then on to her. If that's okay.
That would be fine. Yes, we could start with you. It looks like you're both there and are just going to pass the computer back and forth once your
That's
5
exactly
minutes.
right. Yes, Peggy Cameron and I are neighbors. We live on adjoining streets, and we've come together in the same kitchen in order to do this presentation. Thank you very much for the opportunity. I think we have spoken to the committee before, and we want to traverse some of the same ground that has to do with what is both for us a local issue in our neighborhood, but which has implications for overall transit planning in HRM. It has to do with the designated Robie Street corridor, and it has to do with those blocks of Robie Street, which are essentially between Almond and Chebucto, although primarily between North and Chebucto, that are 3 lanes already. And the thinking seems to have been that the way to implement a traffic corridor along that part of Robie Street is to expand to 4 lanes, and this is the problem that we have. And so we're essentially suggesting that the committee think about the possibilities that might lead to maintaining the same street width, but that at the same time accommodate bus transit. Let's be clear that all of us in the neighborhood are very much in favor of alternatives to the intense use of private vehicles that is so common in our area. And that would include support for things like expanded ferries that we've just heard about, and other ways in which we can support people doing what I think the planners call modal shift. That is, get out of their cars and start taking public transit. That requires, of course, a good public transit system, and we very much want to see a good public transit system. At the same time, we also think that transportation is an integral part of the enjoyment of neighborhoods, and can either enhance or take away from the utility of living in particular places. And in our neighborhood, we think that moving to 4 lanes, in fact, would have a lot of detrimental effects in our immediate area, and that there is an alternative, which is bidirectional traffic signals overhead, that of which there are several examples already in HRM, including on the Angus Hill McDonald Bridge and on Chebucto Road and on parts of Herring Cove Road and so on, that these things are possible to design in ways that give priority to bus traffic, and that at the same time do not involve expanding the size of the road, even a designated transit corridor. So we know that this is much advanced at this point, in the sense that some money has been allocated to HRM by the province and has been used to purchase some of the adjoining lands, and we see that the cost of this has actually become quite significant, which means for us as taxpayers that this adds a bit to the pressure, regardless of whether the money comes from the province or not. And so we're hoping that a much less expensive alternative might be something that the council and staff would look at and take seriously. Unfortunately, in some of the staff thinking that we have seen in writing in response to some questions that people in the area have put forward, there seems to be some skepticism about the utility of putting bidirectional signals or another form of signals. And I've read the comments of the traffic engineers, and there seems to be an error right in the middle of their thinking. They seem to think that the only way to do that is to have a dedicated bus lane in the middle of 3 lanes of traffic. And this is not the case. Indeed, it makes more sense to have the buses adjacent to the
30 seconds
sidewalk.
remaining.
Thank you, and that this is in fact the plan that we have been advocating for and promoting. So we would ask that under the direction of this committee or council as a whole, staff rethink the model they seem to have in mind. So we think there's an alternative, and it's less expensive and would be better for overall transit efficiency. Thank you very much.
Thank Mr. Epstein for that. So next we'll go to Peggy Cameron.
Hi, good afternoon, everyone, and thank you for your time. I did send a package of information, and I'm not clear from what Ross said if you have received that or not.
Thank you. No, I can confirm that we have not received correspondence. It's possible if it was a package of documents, if it was a particularly large file size, that may have bounced or had some other issues. If we do receive a package of correspondence in the future and we're able to process that, we can circulate that to committee members as general correspondence. That would be
okay. Well,
our
I did
ability
have.
to do.
Thank you. I did have some information, and I had gone into quite a bit of detail about just trying to examine what the comments were from HRM staff, the engineering department, and underscoring our concerns about why there hasn't been a ranking of this expenditure, which has grown from $55 million to 73 to $75 million. And then we believe that the provincial Department of Public Works has added $18 million. So we're getting close to $100 million on something which is clearly ill-conceived and doesn't seem to appropriately analyze even just the small distance that we're talking about, which is between North Street and Kennard, not all the way from Almond to Kennard. And so I'm aware that you won't have read that, but I hope it is something you can take the time to read the details on what was wrong with the staff report and ask for a better analysis, starting from the position that the staff maintained there was no time of day direction of flow on Robie Street, which to people living in the neighborhood is rather amazing. We've sat here and watched traffic flow in the morning and flow out in the evening, and so it's not credible. You've heard our position in previous presentation about what the negative impact and real harms are to the community and to the trees and to the peninsula of Halifax. And we would also ask that there be a better thinking about how these monies could be spent. We understand that staff was not tasked with ranking how now $100 million would be spent to optimize transit. And we know that there's many ways that traffic signals and transit priority signals can be used in combination to kind of roll out a red carpet for transit that doesn't require that transit get wider roads. And in my package and in previous correspondence, I've sent a small video or short video by Dr. Peter Firth from Northeastern University in Boston. And he describes in some details all the ways that transit priority signals, which are really a standard in Europe, and in Toronto, maybe 6 years ago already, they had 400 installed in different intersections. And here in Halifax, we're just really beginning, kind of making baby steps. I think there's 12 in total, and I believe only 6 of them are on the peninsula. And what that does is it allows transit to get the advance going through an intersection, or it gets it to extend the green light. It gets to have other ways of controlling traffic flow. So if there is congestion, the cars coming into a particular area can be reduced. And these are all very well thought out and allow some amount of dynamic way to ensure that it is transit really being prioritized. And I think that it's really a matter that Halifax Council needs to make the decision of, are we going to prioritize transit, or are we in fact going to have transit treated as an equal to cars? So that's what the real challenge will be to think about reallocating existing road space is how can you use that to your advantage in that, yes, people could choose to remain in cars, but if they do see the bus being prioritized, it is potentially a better incentive. And one of the things that we see that's happening, I guess it's an interface between our different levels of government that is unfortunately, that we need to be looking at how are we reducing strategically the number of cars coming onto Peninsula. I understand the city's reduced the parking minimums, but we also have to think about having a quota for parking and maybe look at how could we overall have a quota for what number of cars we would put on the peninsula.
30 seconds remain.
Yeah, that's basically all I have to say. And if you have any questions, I'd be happy to answer that.
Thank you for the presentation. Next would be Susan.
Okay, you can hear me now.
We can hear you and see you.
Okay, thank you. I'm here as a result of a request from Cycling Nova Scotia that asked me to speak about an incident on my bike. I was cycling, it was actually over 2 years ago, and on my way to going south on the way to Point Pleasant Park along Terminal Road. And I was just cycling, it was lovely. And then there was a container truck behind me. And then I noticed one in front of me and it was fine. And then all of a sudden the container truck passed me as that was behind me. And then as the other container truck was passing him. So just on separate parts of the road. And fortunately, he was about maybe a foot away from me, not the 3 meters that is recommended for a bike and an auto. And so fortunately, there wasn't a curb on the sidewalk. And so I was able to go on the sidewalk. So I wasn't hit. But I was pissed off and I was pretty scared because I could have been really injured. So I saw where the truck was going, and he went into the parking lot. And so I went over and spoke to him, and I told him that he almost killed me, and he started yelling at me and said I should not have been on the road. The road was for automobiles and trucks and it wasn't for bikes. And I said, well, actually, the bike is considered a vehicle and there is a 3 meter distance between bikes and automobiles or trucks. And he started to say F off and what did I think I was doing? And he was pretty nasty. So then I went to the port police that are just on Terminal Road as well. And I reported the incident. And they said that they would follow up within a month. However, within that day, I got a call from another police officer in the port police, and he said, we know who that guy is, and he has been trouble from day one. So in a month, I got the report, and the officer who initially took my information said that there's no resolution because she said it's a case of he said, she said. And I said, oh, for God's sakes. They said they could not make any recommendations, although the driver did tell her that I was in the way. I should not have been there. Whoops. I should not have been on the road on a bike. And he had no other choice but to pass me instead of staying behind me, right? So that's what they wanted me to talk to you about. So again, it's sometimes how dangerous it is, on the road where we can be. And I'm a pretty experienced cyclist. So fortunately I was able to get on, but because there wasn't a curb, but most of the time that sidewalk has a curb, along the way. So I only have 5 minutes. I understand that. But if I were to make a recommendation, it would be nice to have, it's a wide sidewalk there, be nice to have a dual paved way for cyclists and walkers, because it is wide enough. And the other suggestion I have, cycling paths take up much less space if we have it going two ways on a street. So instead of doing it one way on one side of the street and one way on the other side of the street, if you did just one with north and south, that is better. And I lived in Vancouver, in the city of Vancouver, and cycled. I just had my bike. I didn't have a car. It was about 30 years ago now. And the cycling there was amazing. What they often use that just one, so you go one or the other, and you can make room for people who are walking or carriages, right? And the other thing that they did,
30 seconds
instead of
remaining.
going, pardon?
30 seconds remaining.
Oh, okay. So instead of going on like Spring Garden Road and making a path there for cyclists, go on Clyde Street, which doesn't see as much traffic, and do it there. So thank you very much for hearing me.
Thank you very much for sharing the presentation, and we will take away your words. And I'll make a point of mentioning it to Councillor White as well, if you haven't already.
Okay.
Okay. Thank you.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Bye. So that brings us to the end of public participation. Mr. I'm missing anything?
Nope, that is the end of our registered speakers list.
Okay. So moving along then, we have no information items to bring forward this time. There are no reports. Motions from council. So 14.1, Councillor Cuddle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, I'd like to put the following motion on the table, that the Transportation Standing Committee direct the Chief Administrative Officer to provide a staff information report on parking enforcement capacity to respond to after-hour calls related to illegal parking on transit routes in residential neighborhoods.
Second.
Second by Councillor Purdy. Go ahead, Councillor Cuddle.
Yeah, so for those of us, I think primarily in areas outside of the urban core, residential parking is becoming a bigger and bigger issue. You know, we've made a number of moves at council, including allowing shared housing options, which could be multiple people living in what would traditionally be a single family home. We have 4 units as of right. And you know, we also, through minimal planning requirements and decisions of council, been, you know, reducing or eliminating the need for parking in multi-unit buildings. What this has resulted in is an increase in parking on street, with little to no options for people, particularly in the winter. But issues occur all year round, you know, for them to go. So they're parking on our streets. And this past winter, you know, I had a number of instances where we had cars on transit routes parked illegally, and buses unable to pass or get through. I witnessed this myself. It's resulted in the rerouting of bus routes. It's also, you know, got some emails from some angry transit riders who were stuck on their bus for 45 minutes waiting for a tow truck to come and clear a route. And I can only see that this issue is going to continue to grow. In talking with compliance, my understanding is that there's a very, very limited capacity of resources in parking enforcement and compliance to deal with issues after 5 o'clock. And, I think traditionally we've seen parking enforcement is something that happens downtown during business hours from 9 to 5, because that's traditionally been not only kind of a source of revenue for HRM in parking enforcement, but it's, we've had parking meters and metered parking, and that's kind of where the focus has been. Things are changing quite dramatically in our city. And one of the unintended consequences is on-street parking. And without any resources to respond to parking issues, we run into situations like the one I described with the transit buses. So while I think there's like a need for this, not only related to transit routes, but also related to winter parking bans, I think there's a need for more parking enforcement. And I want to start this by just requesting an information report to kind of verify and get the information on what resources currently exist, what the approach is, and where the issue really kind of comes to a head in residential areas is that the parking issues don't happen between 9 to 5. They happen after work when people are coming home and they're parking on the streets. So the problems are occurring from 5 o'clock p.m. to 7 a.m. And I think that's a bit of it's an emerging issue that is as I mentioned, is continuing to get worse. So I hope you can support this simple request for an information report, and from there we'll see where we'll go. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Cuddle. I don't see anyone else, so I'll just quickly say that we do definitely have, we've outgrown the kind of small town way that we were dealing with this, and after hours when things go over to the police, it's the bottom of the police's priority list for understandable reasons, parking stuff, and so we effectively have no enforcement. And you just need to go around downtown Halifax in the in the after hours where people just leave their vehicles wherever the heck they want, because there is nothing. And I know in my district I had a situation where I had a commercial vehicle that was being left on the street, right, over the weight limit of what was allowed. It would show up in the evening when the fellow came home from work after our parking enforcement was already gone for the day, and he must have worked long hours. Was a hard worker, clearly, because then the vehicle was gone before they would start the day. So it was just like completely in the dead zone, and it was very difficult to deal with. So I think we definitely have a challenge here, and I think we also, this aligns very well with police detasking as well from a public safety point of view. So I very much appreciate the motion. It seems I've inspired Councillor Morris, who would like to weigh in now. Councillor Morris.
Yeah, I'll keep it short, but I have similar problems getting enforcement in the Fairview area, even though it's just off the peninsula, and there are a lot of bus routes, and we're putting a lot of density there. It's really difficult to get any parking enforcement out in my area. And what tends to happen is people they have parking within their complex, their apartment complex, but there's a charge for it. So they will park on the street, and they will park illegally, and they will park year round, right? So it's sort of, we're running into a lot of issues where we're starting to develop in suburban areas, but we don't have the coverage. And something I learned recently, the giant complex with the 500 apartments at Willett and Dunbrack is causing the construction crews also, they have to get to work, and they park on the street. And when we do get enforcement out there, it's not very effective, because apparently the people working in the giant cranes on the construction sites let everybody know when HRM is there on the street doing parking enforcement, and everyone comes down and moves their vehicle. and then it's not that effective. So anyway, I know we're trying to move towards the license plate recognition, and maybe that will be more effective as we go on, but we just need to do more on the enforcement side, especially when it spills over into more congested pedestrian areas and school zones and that sort of thing. So thank you for this.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Cuddle to close.
Thank you. And, you know, I think each of us could probably provide examples of different scenarios that we've experienced in our district. So I do hope that through this information report that staff might also have an opportunity to reach out to some of us and kind of hear what the different scenarios are that we're dealing with. But, you know, there's also a reality aspect to this. And, you know, we kind of had this idea that we're going to be providing housing with no parking and that because no one's going to need a car. And that's not the reality. Or construction sites. You know, these aren't regular commuters. They're people who, you know, not only require their cars to carry their tools and their kits and their, you know, the items they need for their trade. It's not the type of profession where you become a regular commuter to a destination. And so there's a reality that we need to face here too. So, you know, enforcement's one piece of it. You know, the other piece is looking for creative solutions to be able to, you know, accommodate different needs throughout our municipality.
Okay, thank you, Councillor. Seeing no one else on the board, would someone like to call the question? Question has been called. All those in favor? Aye. All those opposed? That's carried. Thank you, Councillor Cuddle. Next up, we have another motion. This one I think is Councillor Clary. Yes, 14-2. Councillor Clary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll move that the Transportation Standing Committee direct the Chief Administrative Officer to provide a staff report on options for seasonal transit to a beach or beaches along the Eastern Shore.
Second by Councillor Purdy.
Thank you. And I won't belabor this one because we did have a presentation from a resident from my district, Ms. Andrea De Silva, last meeting when I gave the notice of motion for this. So very simply, it's something that's been talked about for a number of years. And I don't know if Councillor Purdy will bring it up, but I do know David Hensby was sending me all kinds of information from previous reports that we've looked at, including, I think Musco Ryder had a proposal for a fixed route down that way, which showed a number of benefits, including the ability to bring people to and from beaches in the area. So, you know, there could be a lot of benefits to this, and I would love to see our staff working on whether or not this is a viable option, how we might make it work, and when we could start it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor. So I'm just going to go down the line here because I didn't know who put their hand up first. We'll go to Councillor Purdy because I know you were also working on this with Councillor Clary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thanks, Councillor Clary, for putting that forward. And yeah, I think this is a viable option, actually. My question is for staff and wondering the timeline on this report. When can we expect to see something with some options? Like, is this something that we could potentially consider for next year as a pilot, 2026?
We don't normally have questions of staff for a motion request, but a question about when this might fit in work timeline wise, I think would be fair. Would that be you, Dave?
Well, I guess I'm technically chairing the meeting, so there's no transit staff here, but what I was going to say is, I mean, like, that's something we'll have to take away and come back through the report center process in terms of, you know, where this report would fit within the other council priorities they're working on and everything else like that. And yeah, I guess short answer, I don't think there's staff here that can answer that today.
Okay, fair enough.
All right. Thank you. I'm very much in support of this. I think this is necessary and like to see this sooner rather than later.
Okay. Councillor Cuddle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Yeah, so I'm very much in support of this too. My only disappointment is that it's only looking at the Eastern Shore. You know, over on this side of of the harbor, a lot of people go to Crystal Crescent. You know, I had a woman contact me last year who has a 5-year-old. She lives in Spryfield. She's a single mom. She doesn't have a car, and she has not been able to take her daughter to the beach yet, because there's no way to get to Crystal Crescent, even though it's, you know, just a 20-minute drive. At the same time, we have the rural transit review report coming forward, I believe in April. And in that, there's a tremendous interest around the Sambro Loop for having transit back. And, you know, that includes teenagers needing to get to their part-time jobs on weekends, to sport events, to, you know, seniors, but you need to get to doctor's appointments and commuters. There used to be a bus there, and I've talked to a number of people who used it, like nurses who worked at the hospital, who would use that bus every single day. So, you know, while it's not specific to a beach bus, it is a beach destination, and I think in the summertime you can get over 1,000 people going to Crystal Crescent in a day or more. I forget, there is a number there, and it's quite extraordinary. But it's limited to people who have access to cars. And, you know, back to what we said in the original presentation about the ferries, you know, we're Canada's ocean playground. It's one of our unique assets. It's a benefit of living here. And access to the shoreline is decreasing all the time. So providing those opportunities, particularly as the city grows and as we continue to promote housing with no parking options, you know, providing alternatives is important. So, I mean, I don't know if it's enough to say here to staff that, you know, there is interest heading out to Crystal Crescent as well. Whether I need to come back with a separate motion to have that considered or acknowledged in this report or another report. But I think that it needs to be broader than just the Eastern Shore. That's great for people in Dartmouth, Cole Harbour, and out that way. But I think on this side of the harbor, you know, there's options that are a lot closer, and I think it would be a service that would be utilized not just by beachgoers, but by residents as well.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Morris.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I'm really keen to see some kind of, you know, rural options. So I'm looking forward to that report that's coming forward. But I guess, are people envisioning like a regular size bus going to the beach? Because I think what might be more viable is if we had minivans or some micro mobility option of some kind, not a full scale transit bus. So I'm kind of hoping that there are different options looked at for this. Anyway, I don't know if Dave can comment, but like to have full scale buses going several times a day to the beach, is that what's kind of pictured here? Or is it more looking for a smaller type of service?
I think that would probably be something that would be covered in the report in terms of like, you know,
okay. That's fine. Okay, well then I guess I would just like to see micro mobility perhaps as an option looked at.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clary to close.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And I do take Councillor Cuddle's point. So when looking at this, I did consider, although Ms. De Silva, when she presented, did mention Lawrencetown and Eastern Shore that way. And so that was easier when I did look at Crystal Crescent. It is a little bit, not much, but a little bit further away than Lawrencetown is. And when you look at kind of Eastern Shore versus Chebucto Peninsula, for transit, there's a little bit more infrastructure to connect to. If you're doing it out that way, you could loop around from a terminal out that way. And so anyway, that'll come back in the staff report. And this is, we're only looking at sort of, you know, the feasibility of maybe even a pilot, not even just a full-blown service. So I'd be thinking something smaller buses, microtransit would likely be what comes back to us rather than, you know, full-size 40-foot conventional buses. But again, I don't want to prejudice staff on this. But the idea is, regardless of where it's going to be, I think we need to sort of give staff a location and say, think about this. They may actually look at it and come back, Rainbow, Crystal Crescent, maybe there is something better. I don't know. But we'll come back and talk about this again. And I would hope, like Councillor Purdy, that this is something that could come back to us in the next year, so we could discuss it if it is viable for the next year's budget. So anyway, I do hope you support this, because I think it's an interesting thing, but both from a mobility and a recreational and also tourist point of view. And so I think there's benefit to study it and see what options might be available.
Thank you, Councillor. I'll add just briefly that we'll see what the options are in the report. But I think Rainbow Haven's probably the easy, low-hanging fruit, because the bus is already halfway there anyway. I believe Councillor Purdy would know that we've got a bus that it doesn't go all the way to the end, but we do have a bus on a portion of Bissett Road, so it's probably the most low-hanging of low-hanging fruit compared to either Lawrencetown or Crystal Crescent. That might have sparked a rebuttal from Councillor Cuddle. Councillor Cuddle.
Yeah, so I just wanted to mention too, in the presentation, it wasn't just about going to the beach, it was also being able to hook into the trail network, and integrating it with that as well. So it's not just the beach, and the distance from whether it's to Lawrencetown or to Sambro, it all depends on where you're leaving from. If you're leaving from this side of the Rotary, I do believe that Crystal Crescent would be closer, but I mean that's not the point. That doesn't matter if it's 5 kilometers closer or not. What matters is getting access to our nearby beaches, and as well as hooking into those other recreational opportunities. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Seeing no one else on the board, would you like someone call the question? Question has been called. All those in favor?
Aye.
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 All those opposed? That passes. So next up, I just got to flick back here. Doing this on a laptop is harder. In camera, we have none. We do have an added item, so we'll go back to Councillor Cuddle.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And thank you, Transportation Standing Committee colleagues, for adding this onto the agenda. We have had a couple of presentations from our earlier presenters, Peggy Cameron and Howard Epstein, and also emails. I've received some emails concerned about the trees, concerned about the cost, concerned about the implementation in general of the Robie Street corridor. And I was having a discussion with Mr. Anguish, or Commissioner Anguish, about this, and thought it was a good idea that perhaps we ask for an information report on the Robie Street Transit Priority Corridor for a number of reasons. One, it's been a while, since we have talked about this. Council has changed, so there'd be some benefit to new councillors also learning about this project, and to get a general update from staff, and also to refresh our memories about what we looked at, what we've agreed to, and also to understand where there might be options for change. So with that, I'm going to recommend that the Transportation Standing Committee request a staff information report on the Robie Street Transit Priority Corridor project that provides an overview of the project origin, design options that have been considered, past council direction, community engagement, project status, projected timeline for implementation, current budget commitments, and project risks.
Second.
Second by Councillor Cleary.
Thank you, Councillor Cleary. Just in case you're wondering where I came up with this list from, it was actually from Lucas, and after receiving this, had a brief talk with Lucas Pitts and Commissioner Anguish, and felt that there was agreement that this covered it all, and it was Lucas Pitts who actually drafted it. So that's the origin of it, and appreciate your support on this one. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Clary.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think this is a fantastic idea. I think the more information we get out to the public about this important project is good for us, for them, and for our overall sustainability. So happy to support getting more info out for folks.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Morse.
Thank you. Thanks for bringing this forward. I'm really concerned about the cost escalation, so I think it's important to take a look at it. You know, all our projects are going up in cost, but when they're designed and then they evolve and many years go by and then the costs go way up, you know, it's just important to have a look at it to make sure it's still meeting our original goals. So thanks for this.
Okay. Seeing nobody else on the board, someone like to call the question?
Question.
Question has been called. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
All those opposed? Okay. Thank you, colleagues. That is done. So the only thing left, this is a motion from anybody today. Seeing none, the date of our next meeting will be April 24th. I would take a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Councillor Clary. We are adjourned. Thank you all.